Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leader Cross, I have a few questions about the details of the plan. I have to say, I admire the basic architecture. I think creating a series of options is good. I think having a self-managed option is a good acknowledgement of sort of where we're going in the world. I think I really agree with Representative Winter's point about having these two radically different situations and the health of trying to somehow blend that difference. But I have a few questions about those things. First of all, regarding the blending, it sounds very compelling to say freeze Tier 1 benefits earned to date and earn Tier 2 benefits going forward. But my concern about that is that the main differences between the two tiers are calculated at end of career, most prominently retirement age. And so my question in short is, what is the actual effect in terms of value to the participant of making that election? So specifically, let me put the question this way. Let's say you take a hypothetical person whose current employee, this bill becomes a law, and that person elects then to switch to Tier 2 and does it in such a way that half their career will have been in Tier 1 and half their career will have been in Tier 2. One might hope then that the total value of their benefit would be roughly halfway between what it would have been if they'd have been in Tier 1 their whole life or Tier 2 their whole life. Is that roughly the way the actuarial numbers work out or no?
If we may, this is Brian Septon, Alan Steinberg from ANU. They've worked with us in developing these plans. They've made the judgments that are more responsive in detail, especially given your background, Representative, than I can make, or Tom Cross.
Yeah, so I think the question is whether or not if you work your full career half in Tier 1 and half in Tier 2, will the benefits at retirement be half and half? And I think there's two pieces here that cause the benefits not to be half and half. The first is that the cost of living adjustment on Tier 2, as it was put into the as it was put in last year, is the lesser of 3%, is 1/2 of CPI or 3%, and it's simple, not compounded. So that alone causes a difference, Tier 1 COLA to be more valuable. And the second piece is it has to do under the Tier 2 benefits, you'll have your highest final pay when you walk out the door at retirement, where you'll be covered by the Tier 2. So based on the way I read this piece of legislation, your benefits at Tier 1, when you choose to leave, when you opt to leave Tier 1, will be based on your then current pay. So your Tier 2 benefits will accrue at your future pay, which would be assumed to be higher.
So do you have an estimate of how far off the actual answer is from the average?
I don't have that estimate.
Do you know if it would be possible to provide us with information like that before this bill comes to a floor vote?
I'm not sure what the question
is. Yeah, can you clarify what information you're looking for, please?
Take an average employee, presume they spend half their career in Tier 1 and half their career in Tier 2 as set forth in this bill. Where on the scale from their hypothetical Tier 1 benefit to their hypothetical Tier 2 benefit would be their actual benefit, given the fact they made that election?
Yes. My name is Alan Steinberg. We can try and develop that number. I guess the question about that, though, is that we would anticipate, and again, I'm going to sort of put Dick Ingram and his colleagues on the spot, is that any individual employee in the system would get some modeling support to know how much they're going to derive from Tier 1 versus what their contributions to Tier 1 would be during each of these triennial cycles. So they'd have the opportunity to do a cost-benefit analysis based on their individual situation as to whether Tier 1 or Tier 2 or the self-managed plan was the best deal for them. So I think this 3-year process, I want to sort of talk about that for a moment. The initial concern was that if we were locking individuals in, the state is going to be paying 6% of the average cost for these plans, and the employees are paying the rest. If we locked in a single election, as those costs went up, you're asking people to make an ongoing commitment to a number that could escalate. So although the 3-year cycle is a bit complicating, it also gives individuals the right to the opportunity to make that individual choice every 3 years. What do I expect to get out of the system if I stay? What will I be asked to put in? Is that a good decision for me? So we can run some numbers for you, or try at least, but I think part of what's embedded in the architecture here is to let individual employees make that decision for themselves rather than us sitting here in a room and judging which will be the best decision for them.
Okay. Thank you. So on that point then, I think there's two concerns that I have around this question of the subsequent recalculations and the subsequent elections. The first is one that's been discussed a lot at this table by people on both sides of the issue, which is, well, you're going to recalculate and then the number will go up, and then in turn that would result, presuming that our employees are making what economists would call a rational decision, that'll result in the people who are getting the worst deal, in other words, people who are cheapest for the system, to leave, and then the next round, the recalculation will bump the price up a whole bunch, resulting in a whole lot of new additional people who all of a sudden would make a rational decision to leave, and then you sort of have a real rough spot for the last person standing. I think that problem is exacerbated certainly by the structure of nobody new comes into Tier 1, and so it would, I think, create a end of, a sort of 15 years from now balloon problem. But I'm curious also about whether something, albeit more modest, would still exist in the case of Tier 2, because as I understand it, the employee and employer contributions are each equal to half of normal cost under Tier 2 in this bill. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. The state is paying 6% of pensionable pay, and the individual pays the difference between the normal cost for their tier and that 6%.
Got it. Okay. So then would we not expect a similar phenomenon to take place in the case of Tier 2, where if the employees are making rational decisions, the cheapest employee leaves, normal cost goes up, and then the employee will have to pay more to stay in Tier 2 as well. And this is now a system that's going on forever, and so over time you would think that would result in sort of an eventual pushing of everybody into Tier 3. Is that not a fair assessment?
I think, well, we've debated what the migration patterns would look like as a part of trying to put these numbers together. And I think the one element is, as we talked about individual decision-making, I would anticipate that individuals are going to make both the balance sheet and a cash flow analysis as to whether or not they're going to stay in Tier 1 or Tier 2 or self-managed. So I don't think that, that it's easy enough to say that, the most expensive people will stay in Tier 1 and thereby drive up the cost. I just think because of the complexity of this decision, I don't know that anyone feels comfortable modeling a particular outcome at this point. Because of the fact that they've got to make, again, individuals are going to make both cash flow and balance sheet analysis. So I don't know. Again, I think we'll know a lot more after the first 3-year cycle. But I don't, we've modeled a range of outcomes, knowing that the truth is going to be somewhere within that range. And I think that's about as comfortable as the actuaries would get in terms of making that kind of prediction, as a range of outcomes. And I think we've modeled if everyone migrates versus if only a modest number migrate. And we just know the truth is going to be somewhere between those two numbers.
I mean, I have to say that my primary hesitation vis-a-vis this legislation is regarding exactly this point. I mean, in fact, you just said that you're not comfortable modeling what would happen, and we all know that the burden on the employee would be a function of what happens, and we're going to lock it into statute. That seems to be well, to phrase this in the context of a discussion that Representative Neckarts had earlier in this morning, we're essentially shifting the entirety of the risk from the state to the employee, and that's kind of a good thing to do because, frankly, we have managed the risk poorly, and so that wasn't meant to be a joke, actually, although I appreciate the laughter. I mean, that's why we're here. We have managed the risk poorly, but to say that we don't have a clear understanding of the magnitude of that risk going forward, but we're going to put all of it on the employee, that feels to me to go a little bit far, quite frankly.
Well, I guess I think there's still some risks the state is bearing. The way one could look at a pension is it's a bundle of economic risks, pay growth, mortality, market, interest rate, things like that, and the state is still retaining the market risk, and it's also retaining the full risk for the $85 billion. So I would characterize this as more of a sharing of different risks between employees and the state, rather than a complete shifting of risk to employees.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that. You said that what share of the market risk is the state bearing if the state's contribution is a fixed percent?
It's a fixed percentage of normal cost. If the market fluctuates, the normal cost doesn't necessarily change. but the state would have to pay up the shortfall or wait for the market to come back. This is not a defined contribution plan unless people go to S&P.
I see.
In the Tier 1 and Tier 2, there is still market risk, so it's still a defined benefit plan, and the employer is stepping up to that risk. So this is really a rebalancing of the risks rather than a complete abdication of risk to employees.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. I appreciate that.
Thank you, and please provide your contact information to the committee so that if individual members want to contact you, they can do so after. Mr. Biss, I'm sorry to cut you off. Do you want one follow-up real quick?
Can I just one final unrelated question of Leader Cross? I showed up here as a freshman. I'm new here, and I apologize for the long questioning, but I'm trying to get my brain around this important question. I showed up and I asked to serve on 2 appropriation committees and was given the opportunity to do that. And we've focused on budgeting for outcomes, and we've sat in those rooms and argued long and hard about the outcomes, the impact of various cuts on the state's ability to provide services. And we were arguing usually about tens of millions or millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars. This bill is fundamentally a cut of tens of billions of dollars. And I'm curious to know in as much detail as possible what your assessment of the outcome that would be. And that's presumably measured in terms of retention as well as recruitment of employees. What would be the outcome on our ability to provide services of making this enormous and historic cut?
Well, Representative, I'm not sure how to answer that question other than the one option is to do nothing, and the liability continues to grow and grow and grow. And you, I'm sure, have seen the ramp we have that shows us climbing from 4.5 to almost $20 billion. And not addressing this in the context of that discussion means right now the third largest expenditure out of our budget is pensions. In about 5 years it'll be the second, and it'll continue to grow in line with Medicaid and education. So clearly I think everybody would agree we cannot sustain the current ramp, that it will consume us. I think I would hope everybody would agree with that. So
I do, certainly.
Yeah, and I'm not you ask a fair question. I'm not sure when you talk about outcome, I'm not sure if you're suggesting that because we address this and try to allocate a cost to employees that there's a negative to that. I think it seems to me there's a need to accept the fact as an employee that I am getting a larger benefit than I'm paying for, and that there needs to be an adjustment. Again, the $80 billion is over to the side. That's us now. We're going to accept that under this bill, but I need to pay for that benefit. And if I was in any other sector, in any other state, I presume you would be paying for the benefit you're going to get. So I'm not sure I'm trying to answer your question, but and if I didn't, follow up with me. I apologize.
My specific question is, what impact do you believe this bill would have on our retention of employees and hiring of new employees? Because it does fundamentally create a worse deal for employees.
Well, we took that leap a year ago when we created Tier 2. And I don't know what's happened then, but if you're a state employee, you're going to work to 67 versus a different age. If you're a state employee or teacher, et cetera, you're going to get a smaller cost of living increase, et cetera. We made changes. We've accepted as a state that we needed to make changes when we went to two-tier, the two-tier system. We may not like it, but we made that. So, and I don't think it doesn't sound like the world has come to an end when we went to the two-tier. Again, it's something we had to do, and we accepted that. It wasn't easy. I think it's maybe a little easier than this. I would grant you, but we continue. And Representative May said you've heard people in these conversations we've all had saying, I understand we've got a problem. Some do, some don't, and I'm willing to pay my fair share. So I don't know how anyone's really got the answer to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do want to join Leader Cross in appreciation to those who have talked about willingness to talk about these things. I was glad you pointed that out. And I also want to point out that under the leadership of Speaker Madigan, we've had task forces. Representative Poe spent more time in Chicago in 2009 than he probably appreciated. But we've had task forces, we've had commissions, we've had pension study groups, and every one of these groups that was here today, with the exception of the AFL-CIO, was invited into every one of those meetings and was able to offer testimony at that time. So at this time, Representative David Winters makes a due pass as amended motion on Senate Bill 512, and the clerk will please call the roll.
McCarthy?
Yes.
Necritz?
I'd just like to say that I think that our fiscal problems are so significant that, and I've always said, we're going to have to use every arrow in our quiver to solve these problems. This may not have been my preferred process for making this to happen, but it is the process that I'm faced with. And while, again, it's not the bill that I might prefer or that I might have drafted, it is the result of lengthy discussions and a lot of work. And we do this a lot around here, where we're voting up or down on things that that would not be perfect in my mind, but that's just the way things go around here. So this is a very critically needed fix for a problem that we have going ahead. And I appreciate, Mr. Johnson, you're doing the analysis on how much this is going to consume, how much the pension is going to consume of our general revenue funds. So I'm voting aye. Thank you.
Poe? Biss?
I share the understanding of the depth of the problem, and I have to say that I am not of the belief that it's possible to address this problem without making substantial changes to current employees. And I have to also, on top of that, express some frustration with the comments from the panel of opponents from whom I didn't see a lot of willingness to talk about that. That said, to me, this is an enormous step with enormous ramifications. My belief in the free market makes it hard for me to believe that it wouldn't have enormous impact on our workforce. And so with the hope that I can resolve my concerns between now and the floor vote, I'm going to vote present for now.
Burke? May?
For today, Leader Cross, I appreciate your trying to address my concerns of the 3-year review. But for today, I'm going to vote no. I am open-minded to it. I absolutely am concerned about the overall stability of the system. But I am going to vote no for today.
Morrison?
Just to very quickly address something that was stated when our 2 university professors were speaking. One comment was made that underfunding is a grave concern for those professors, and I'm going to vote aye on this bill. Again, I think if we're going to protect the pension system for those younger teachers, for those younger workers, reform is necessary. So I will be a yes.
Singer? Winters?
On a vote of 6 yes, 2 no, and 1 present, the bill as amended will be favorably reported. Representative Cross, I do know early in your discussion you mentioned that you do have another amendment adding the judges system into this bill. Will we see that back in committee, or have you asked it to go straight to the floor?
I think floor. We'll talk about it on the floor.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Seeing no further business to come before the committee, we will recess to the call of the chair. Thank you.